Hello, I'm Penny Thornton and welcome to my astrology channel. This is where I take a look at the astrology that's happening at the time, and I look at it in a general way so we can all take something away from it, even if we're not professional astrologers or even amateur astrologers. But of course, I like to get into the nitty-gritty of it as well. And so not on every video, but on most, I will do something that takes us into a more technical aspect of astrology, because astrology is so full of meaning, and I think sometimes we do it a bit of a disservice by just talking generalities, when as you take it deeper and you look at so many meanings that it has, it can really enrich your life. And it's certainly, it's like having a big flashlight or a spotlight on the way ahead, because you can see where things are, and it gives you a much better perspective. Anyway, enough of that. Let's start with the full moon in Pisces. Now, this is going to take place on the 2nd of September, and it's on the same day as Venus is at the opposite side of the zodiac to Saturn. And I call this a kind of double whammy, because they both have a similar kind of sense of an ending. And I'll go into that in a little more detail in a minute. And I'm going to talk, first of all, just about this full moon in Pisces. Now, the first thing I want to talk about is that what the idea of a full moon in Pisces means, because we're all going to be under that full moon in Pisces. And Pisces is the last sign of the zodiac, and it's said to have the whole of the zodiac's experience in it. So it's a very complex sign. It's also the sign that rules the 12th house of shadows and darks and deeps. It's our unconscious mind. And so what happens when the moon is in Pisces? It's a period where we dissolve our experience somehow. We reflect on what's happened. It's a time of dissolution. It's also a time of processing. So it's a time where we process what's gone before, and we figure out what worked, what didn't, what we want to keep, what we want to throw away. So it is that point of processing and dissolution, just as a neat little title on what happens with a full moon in Pisces. Now, of course, it will vary according to where that is in your natal chart. And I also want to look at how it is for Pisces and Virgo and Gemini and Sagittarius in particular. But where I want to take us at this point is also the relationship of this full moon in Pisces with the new moon in Pisces that occurred on the 23rd of February. Now, as soon as a new moon happens, you begin a waxing cycle. And you can see that as the moon gets, bigger and bigger in the night sky. And things start and grow on a waxing cycle. So that if you think back to that late February period, remember it was just after Valentine's Day, coming into the early March period, and think back at what new things happened at that point. What things made that period of time new and different? Now, you might have, for instance, decided, to become a vegan or to go on a health regime, or maybe you met someone else or something else happened that came into your arena that was new and different. So now, 6 months on, at the full moon in Pisces, you get to reflect on those new beginnings that occurred 6 months ago and see where you have reached. How well did it go? And of course, rather like the whole idea of the moon in Pisces anyway, that idea of dissolution and processing, you decide what's worth continuing with and what really is worth not exactly putting in the dustbin of history, but at least leaving behind. Now, the other important thing about looking at these pairings, new moon and full moon in the same sign, is what was going on in the world at that time. Now, in fact, on the 23rd of February, we were becoming aware 32 countries now had the coronavirus, and it was very clear that something very big was going on. This wasn't just any old flu that was going to disappear and could be treated. No, it seemed to be much more challenging than that. So 32 countries on the 23rd of February had growing cases of coronavirus. And it was on that day that CNN officially called it a pandemic. But it took until the 8th of March, still in that waxing cycle, for the WHO, the World Health Organization, to label COVID-19 officially a pandemic. And that's important. Also in that cycle, there was a Sun-Neptune conjunction. So in the 14 days from the new moon through, it was also, we found out a lot more about the coronavirus at that point. And so the Sun-Neptune conjunction was an important part of that discovery. Now, since that time, I've considered that the virus really does have a Neptunian signature, not only because of what was happening at that period of the year, which was very Neptunian and Piscean, but also just the behavior of the virus. We can't see it, it's invisible, but it's contained in droplets, and that's very watery. And also it has so many faces, this virus, so many ways of getting into your system and different organs. Some people are aware they haven't got it, they have no idea. And other people are just laying flat by it, and in fact succumb, lose their lives to it. It has many duplicitous and difficult to manage, hold and sustain your grip on this virus, which is why I think it has a Neptunian signature. And the reason I'm talking about this is that because at this full moon in Pisces on the 2nd of September, as we move forward in the days that follow that, we shall also have the Sun and Neptune meeting, this time at opposite ends of the zodiac. So we now have another part of the coronavirus story brought to us by the relationship between the Sun and Neptune. So my feeling is that, while it would be good to think that we will make progress, and we are making progress with understanding the virus, that it does seem already at this period of time that spikes are now happening all over the world in different countries. And it's possible by the time we get to that full moon, and also because on that time we have Venus in opposition to Saturn, and Saturn is all about restrictions, that we may see far more restrictions on our movements again, country to country. And certainly maybe we'll also make discoveries. I mean, one of the good things about Saturn is the idea that that something becomes solid, so we know where we are with it. So let's hope too that there may be greater understanding of how we can manage this coronavirus. And I think that really is the operative word. So that's why these two periods of time are linked, both in the sense of our personal lives. We can personally dip into our memory bank and figure out what was happening at that period of time. And as I said, if you think of Valentine's Day and you think of the end of February, turning March, what was going on with the coronavirus, you might be able to pinpoint things that happened that have now reached some kind of conclusion. And in fact, when I think about the full moon and we have closure and completion, I also think of conclusions. And I do think the same thing with a Venus-Saturn opposition, conclusions. And why I love that word is that you can reach a conclusion in the sense that you can reach an understanding. You get a grip on it. You say, yeah, I know what I'm doing. I understand, now I know. So that's a conclusion you come to. But of course, a conclusion can also mean an ending. That means you're done and dusted with something. And that doesn't always have to be a bad thing. Sometimes we've been through a process, we've been through a study course, or we've been on some kind of, program, and it's taken 6 months, and now we're done and dusted. We've got somewhere with that. But yes, especially combined with a Venus-Saturn opposition, it may too be that we are through with something, and that is not such a happy ending. It's something that's a little bit more painful, but life is all about endings and beginnings, as I always say, the great cycle of life. Now, when I come a little bit more specifically to look at Pisces and this full moon in your own sign, yes, of course, conclusions are important and you need to reach them. And so we can do that consciously. But sometimes unconsciously, things happen and we come to the end of something. But what I think particularly about this full moon and the idea it's on the relationship axis, because the sun is in the area of relationships, that it's good to reach a conclusion about a relationship. That can mean you know what you're doing, and let's stretch that relationship out and think for a minute about the relationship you have with a company, the relationship you have with a business partner, the relationship you have with a close friend, or the relationship you have with a member of the family. It's all about concluding relationships. But let's not forget that the most important relationships of our lives, although I can feel myself arguing with myself at this point, but I suppose the relationships that give us our greatest joys and our greatest pain are intimate, romantic relationships. So this full moon may have quite a lot to do with reaching a conclusion about that. And that is the same, really, for Virgos as well, because we've got the sun in Virgo, the moon in the 7th house. So we've got an interplay here. What I also want to say, which is maybe a very good thing to think about, if we think about the moon in Pisces, and we think about, if you are a Pisces, that this is all about your image and how you feel about yourself and all sorts of personal aspects of your existence. Often we see ourselves, or we understand about ourselves through the eyes of another person, how other people perceive us, and that's what this full moon is about too. And of course, if other people perceive us, or we believe that they perceive us as whatever it may be, and it's good, then our confidence is buoyed. But if somebody perceives us as failing in some way, then our confidence is shattered. Well, at least it goes down. So this full moon, both for Virgos and for Pisceans, is how you are perceived through the prism of a relationship. So that's just something to think about, not necessarily to act upon, but to think about in reference to what's going on. Now, if we look at the other two signs for whom this full moon is very important, and why it's important is that it's going to fall in one of the angular houses, and these are the dynamic houses of the solar chart. For Virgo and Pisces, it's the 1st and 7th house, and for Sagittarius and Gemini, it's the 10th and 4th house. So we look at, for Sagittarius, and we think, where is this moon in Pisces? Well, the moon is in the 4th house for Pisces, and the sun is in the 10th house. And we've got this 10th 4th axis here, which is all about work-life balance. So this may be a period of time where you really feel that it's out of balance. You're either too much focus on work and none on your private life. You're not having enough home time, enough downtime, or it could be the reverse. And I'm thinking of this for both Gemini and for Sagittarius. Or is it that you're not out there in the world enough? You're not building your dreams, focusing on the things that you want to have happen in your life or your career. Not everybody has a career. And that the drains or the family life or your home life have greater calls on your time than what you would like to be doing out on the world. So that full moon will tend to accent that. Now, I'm going to move on and look at that Venus-Saturn opposition, because this too affects 4 signs more than others. So we're looking at Cancer and Capricorn, because Venus is in Cancer, Saturn is in Capricorn, and I'm looking at Aries and Libra, because these occupy those dynamic, the Venus-Saturn opposition is in the dynamic 10th and 4th house of your solar chart. So I talked about conclusions, and what we get really with Saturn is that we consolidate things. So things become real. And that can be a good thing. And if we think about Venus, this is both a planet we associate with romance and with relationships and love, but also to do with finance and things that make our life beautiful, things that make us feel good in life. So on the one hand, you can look at Saturn and consider this is going to consolidate something for me. So it's going to make it real. But of course, looking at Saturn in the sense of constriction as well, rather than construction, we've got constriction, then it can also show you the limits, the limitations of all things Venus. So we're looking at the limitations of a relationship. We're looking at the limitations of finances. They all come into the pot, but particularly for those 4 signs, Aries, Libra, Cancer, and Capricorn. Now for Cancer and Capricorn, we are looking at the relationship axis. So if you've decided to get married or you've named the day, then that's a very Venus-Saturn thing to do. And of course, it's beautifully contained as well in the full moon as well. You've got, as I said, double whammy going on here. But so too is the idea that you've gone as far as you can with a working relationship or some other kind of relationship. It doesn't necessarily mean it's over forever. That's done and dusted, no more. It can mean that there's a pause and that, you know, it needs breathing space. It needs time to resolve itself. So it can come back, but it certainly needs some kind of break at this time. For Aries and Libra, I mean, we're looking at this long process. Saturn has been moving through, the fourth house for Librans. So there've been a lot of restrictions and lessons to learn, and they've been to do with the family and home. I mean, how many Librans have I had tell me they can't sell their house? Or how many Librans aren't speaking to their mother-in-law or something like that? Something's gone wrong. And Saturn makes it very difficult, that you have to face a lot of things that are very unpleasant. But of course, ultimately, Saturn brings rewards. And always, when you put Venus with Saturn, the potential for a reward is there. So the potential to have healing, for family upsets to be resolved, for maybe a property to shift, or for maybe things to do with your home circumstances to really start to be more livable with. I think too, when I look at Venus in the fourth house, and that's really for Aries. Aries has got Saturn in the 10th. I'll come to that in a minute, but Venus in the fourth. What do we do when we've got Venus in the fourth, but we decide to pick up a pot of paint and we want to make our surroundings more beautiful to live in? And I'm going to be talking about that to another sign shortly. But putting Saturn in the mix, we've had Saturn for a long time going over the area of career and life goals. And if you've had an easy peasy 2 years plus where you've had success after success, my goodness, you've got a lot of good karma. Because for most Arians, there have been some terrible potholes and disappointments and setbacks and failures. But of course, the whole thing about success is, well, even overnight success, which is a wonderful thing, it can go as easily as it came because it's got to be worked at. You've got to develop that success. And because you have to wait a long time for success, often when it does come, it's more appreciated. I think that's what Saturn has been trying to do, is just to sort of show you that success takes time. And if you have to keep getting back in the saddle or back to the drawing board, so be it. That's Saturn's way, as it were. And we get a little bit of that with Libra as well, because it is the 4th, 10th axis. So I said I talked to another sign about getting a pot of paint, throwing out an old sofa, putting in a new sofa because of Venus. And the reason I'm going to do that is because I'm going to talk about Venus as well. Because Venus is going to move into the sign of Leo. And when Venus moves into Leo, not only is it good news for Leos, because at some point there will be a real breakthrough or a really rather something that makes you feel life is worth living. And in this year of the coronavirus, there haven't been a lot of days like that. But when Venus is in your sign, that is exactly what happens. You get a feeling of being glad to be alive, of being one of the lucky few for a change. And of course, things to do with the heart, things to do with finance, these two can be special, it can be very fruitful. Now, you can hear a hesitation in my voice because at some point, Venus is going to square Uranus. And I think, if I remember rightly, it's the 17th of September. We keep a little, red dot in the diary on that one. And there are two things I want to look at here, and I'm going to look particularly at Leos, at Aquarians, at Taurians and Scorpios. And I'm going to look at the whole area of love and relationships. If we think about Venus being in the dynamic angular houses of the solar chart, then this brings Venusian energy into your life. And Venusian energy is good energy. So we have opportunities, during this time to really sort of make our life sweeter and to respond to the sweeter things of life, to learn the blessings of compromise and of giving way to others. Venus teaches us how to really do these things in a loving and fair-minded way. But come Uranus, Venus-Uranus, then you get a lot of changing patterns in relationships. I want to go back to, now remember, if you're in this group, we're looking at Leos, Aquarians, Taurians, and Scorpios. Go back to the 15th of August. That wasn't very long ago. Think about what happened, especially in the area of either relationships or finance. Did something happen at that period? At that time, Uranus turned retrograde. And often when a planet changes direction, all sorts of things related to that planet's story become super huge. Those sort of things. So change, the unexpected, it can be a bolt of lightning, both in a good way and in a way that causes a lot of smoke. So put Venus there on September the 17th. You may find that there is a link between what happened around about the middle of August and what then happens around about the middle of September. It's a time when things can come in, storming in a good way, especially to do with love, romance, and relationships, but it's also a period of sharp breaks. Remember, we've had this theme playing really quite a lot as I've been going through various aspects and points in the astrology on this video. But what I want to mention here as well, given relationships are really in the foreground for Leos and Aquarians now, when we come to Taurus and Scorpio, remember what I was talking about when I said get a pot of paint and throw out the sofa. That's particularly for the Taurians, because Venus is going to be moving through the 4th house, and we really want the area where we live, our sanctuary, to be a beautiful place. Now, it can be beautiful because we've got gorgeous candles and we've got lots of love going on in the home. So that's why it's our beautiful sanctuary. But we can also make it beautiful by doing something to our decor. So that's in there. And if we look at the opposite sign, if we look here at Scorpio and we look here at Venus in the 10th house, it's a time really to make sure that we are working with the right people I don't mean social climbing, that's too much. But if we want to make progress in life, we sometimes need people on our side. And so this becomes a really important period for getting people on side who can really help shape your life, especially your material world, into the shape that you want it. So almost there, almost done with this video, but there were some other things I wanted to talk about very briefly. You heard me mention Uranus turning retrograde. Well, in these next couple of weeks from the full moon on the 2nd of September, Jupiter turns direct and Mars turns retrograde. And whenever we have these changes of direction, there are a lot of very important events that tend to cluster around that time. Now, later in the month, end of September, Saturn turns direct after 5 months in retrograde motion. And on the 4th of October, Pluto turns direct. That's after many moons too. So what happens, and I'm trying to make this easy to understand and very brief, is that while planets have been retrograde, especially the big ones, you know, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, those changes of direction, stationary. There have been a lot of things that have been going on under the radar, or things that have been in the process of becoming. So that as soon as these planets turn direct, you find out what's going on. You find out whether things are workable, whether things are going forward, or whether, you know, there are the things that have been encountered in that time are insuperable. And these are going to, all these planets are going to play a very important part in a lot of global stories. So leave the coronavirus out for a moment, but they're certainly going to play a part in the American election. We're going to see some very, very important developments, especially in the October period. That's before the November election. And I think in a way, this period of time we're in now, as all the planets start to turn direct, so to speak, and Mars is actually retrograde, is that it becomes a time to get our ducks in a row. And I suppose that's what I wanted to end on, because again, looking at how our lives have changed this year, and most of us, we've had to jettison well, not our dreams exactly, but we certainly have plans and things that we would normally expect to do. We haven't been able to do them, and they're quite mundane, normal things. Family, holidays, schooling, traveling on business. I mean, everything has changed. So we've had to really make huge adjustments with our long-term plans as well as our short-term plans. So rather than, and I mean, we all get frustrated when we can't do what we want to do, especially if the government has told us we can't do what we want to do. That's really very frustrating. But I think if we have a better attitude to it, first of all, we've got to realize this isn't forever. How long it's taking, yes, it may take longer than we'd like, but it will eventually resolve itself. Life goes on. It may not go on in quite the same way, but it will go on. And some of our dreams have got to be revamped, but we'll make new dreams. That's the important things. We need to make new dreams. And maybe they haven't even sorted them out. We haven't quite figured out what they are just yet, but we will. And it's important to remember that. And what I want to leave you with is this really important phrase that I haven't actually used much, certainly in my working life in terms of my writings and my audios and videos, but it's crucially important. I think what each one of us really has to do, whatever our stars are doing, whether we've got a full moon on our sun or whether we've got Saturn sitting on our Venus, is that we have to manage our circumstances. That's all we can do. If we can manage the circumstances we find ourselves in, we have achieved. And it's not quite the same as setting the bar lower, but sometimes if we can meet our expectations, it gives us a sense of succeeding. And if we've set the bar too high, we've set some ridiculous targets for ourselves, we will fail in this kind of climate, or we might fail. So far better to work with what we've got, manage our circumstances, and achieve the realizable achievements we've set ourselves. So thank you for listening, and I look forward to speaking to you soon. Bye for now.